Well, welcome back to AASR Live. I'm Guy Stevens, the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and really excited to have you here today. And as I was watching that intro, I was thinking we need a new intro, and it's coming very soon, a new intro with our new logo. So many of you have probably seen our new logo. I've got a new intro probably on the next segment that we'll be introducing. So something else to look forward to aside from what we're here for. So any of you that are not familiar with who I am, I, of course, am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. If you're not aware of who the Alliance is, the Alliance was formed about almost 5 years ago now. We are an organization, a nonprofit that was formed really around looking at things like restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, and corporal punishment, looking at many of the outdated and harmful practices that are happening in schools around the world and the impact that they're having. Looking at the way our discipline practices are feeding the school to prison pipeline. And of course, we have a vision to see safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. And we don't want to see restraint seclusion happening anywhere that they might be happening. We want to be moving in better directions to better support children and really all human beings. So if you're not familiar, hopefully you can learn a little bit more about us by going to our website, which is endseclusion.org. And we've got a tremendous library of fantastic videos and things that you can learn more about us. So, of course, these AASR Lives are one of the favorite things that, one of my favorite things that we do, which is every 2 weeks we come here and we have amazing guests that share their experience and their knowledge and the work they're doing, which really are things that lead to creating better and safer school environments and doing a lot of tremendous good around the world. And today is no exception. In fact, we are joined today by guests from around the globe where I happen to be. I am, of course, in the United States, in Maryland, outside of the nation's capital. Our guests today are coming to us from Australia. So while it is 3:34 here local time for me, it is 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning for our guests. And I'm really excited to have Francisco and Amy Paula joining us today. They're going to be sharing about co-design and how the right level of therapeutic support at the right time can end the use of seclusion. I do want to let you know before I introduce our guests that, as always, you probably know if you're a regular viewer of the show, but as always, these sessions are getting streamed live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And you can go back after the fact and watch them on any of those platforms, so they are recorded. You also have the ability to listen as an audio-only podcast. So if you like to listen on the go, you can go to iTunes or Spotify, and typically within a couple of days of the live broadcast, we have the podcast version up there that you can listen to. So please feel free to do that as well. And one last request before I introduce our and where you're joining us from, because we always love to see who's joining us for these live events. With that, let's get to the exciting part. Let's get to introduce our guest. And let me start with Francisco. Francisco de Paula is passionate about supporting all to reach their potential. The CALMER approach was developed out of his passion to close the gap between theory and practice while looking for ways to make more meaningful impact in positive behavior support. Francisco has been working in the disability sector for over 20 years, starting as a support worker in accommodation, day programs, recreation programs, and employment settings. Since 2011, he's been working as a behavior support practitioner and an education and training facilitator, both in both TAFE and private courses. He is certified person-centered active support facilitator since 2016 through Greystanes Disability Services in New South Wales. I think I'm getting that right. Person-centered practices, PBS, neuroscience, and trauma-informed practice strongly influence his practice and training. And he is joined by Amy, and Amy is an occupational therapist. And occupational therapists, Amy, are some of our favorite people. Occupational therapists and social workers, they're good people, who's been working in community disability setting for over 20 years with a passion for meaningful engagement and co-design. She loves anything that leads to people having autonomy and participation in their lives. So we are really excited to have both Amy and Francisco joining us today. as I mentioned, from around the world, joining us from Australia. And they're a day ahead of us. They are already in their Friday while we are here in our Thursday. So, Amy and Fran, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having us, Guy.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your wonderful introduction too.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and thank you for being here. And I was just reflecting. It's probably been a while since we've had a conversation, and one of those conversations, no doubt, led to, hey, I've got to have you on the AASR Live podcast, and then of course, we're really booking out. We're almost a year ahead now. We're booking out things quite far in advance.
Wow.
So it was probably a while ago that we booked this, and it's great to actually have you here joining us. We do have a couple of people that have already joined on and telling us where they're from. I've got a neurodivergent by nature, excited to be here from beautiful west coast of Canada. I've got Cass Griffith-Bennett in Washington State, autistic and ADHD parent of multiple autistic young kids. I've got somebody here from New Zealand as well, working as an FASD navigator. So a number of people have already kind of weighed in and said hello. I do want to let you other folks know that might have already joined us. Tell us who you are and where you're from, and we'd love to hear more about that in the chat. So with that, it is time to hand the reins over to you. You've got a special presentation in store for us today. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and bring your presentation up. And I know that Amy, as I recall, is in the driver's seat of the presentation. And what our viewers might not realize is that although you're on two different monitors, you happen to be sitting right next to each other. So, Fran, if you say something wrong, I might see an arm going over or whatever the case may be.
My leg, guys, it's going to be my leg.
That's right. That's a lot more subtle. So what we're going to do is I have your presentation now up on the screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disappear and hand the reins over to you to go through your presentation. We're thinking this will probably be about, an hour or so. And of course, we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat at any time. Fran and Amy, you don't have to keep an eye on the chat. We will. And when you're done, we can go through those questions and ask those of you as well. So at any rate, let me go ahead and hand the reins off to you. Unless you have any questions for me, it will be your show to take from here.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And of course, if you need me, I'm just behind the curtain. So just say my name and hopefully I will appear.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, take it away.
Wow. After that amazing introduction, I just wanted to begin with a welcome to you all from Australia, and also an acknowledgement of country that Fran and I, we live and work in the lands of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation, the Indigenous owners and caretakers of the lands of Australia. We also want to acknowledge all the people with lived experience who have supported the development of the CALMER approach. And you will see, as we go through the presentation, you're going to see some things that look kind of like rough notes, but that's because this is also about making it real and showing you how it works with real people in everyday settings. And we also want to acknowledge all those people who have given us their consent to share their experiences and stories as a part of this shared learning experience. So thank you very much for that. We also have had some partnerships we'd like to acknowledge with the Jeddah Institute, Dundaloo, and South Creek School. So to start off, we've got some disclaimers. The CALMER approach is not new science or theory. It is what we call a knowledge translation evidence-informed practice. So we have taken evidence and translated it into something that works in everyday life. And it is about the practical understanding of neurobehavioral sciences. And in life, we kind of joke, when you say something is really complicated, it's like we talk about the brain as being really complicated. Someone's a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist. And what we want to do is take neuroscience and make it everyday. So it's not too complicated for people to understand and to support others from a place of understanding. And so for both of us have come from working very, very long times in disability sectors and working with people with lived experience. So it was born out of providing support for people with people with a disability. However, the approach is inclusive, and it's not specifically for people with disability, it's for all people. So there's a little picture of us with our kids. And did you want to run us through?
Yeah, so I think I'd just like to acknowledge here some of the progress along the way. The CALMER approach model as a practice probably start taking off. I started to come up with some ideas around 2018 when I started to think a simple phrase, rethinking the function of behavior, because the way that the theory was saying and the practice wasn't quite matching what the families was expecting it. So since 2018, I have been on this journey. And then early last year, I think we came up with CALMER approach, and I think brought in nicely together. Then as an organization, we are fairly new. We were formed early this year, April this year. So we're still on the journey, and we are also registered an Australian National Disability Insurance provider, providing behaviour support and therapeutic support and for intervention as well. And since we established the CALMER approach, I've been able to provide training for allied health professionals, schools, parents, also been presenting at national and international conferences as well. So that's a little bit of our background there.
So this is just a quote to get us started, and it sort of frames where we started as well. And both of us had this kind of question in our mind in our different areas of practice. And then this is a paper that's been published more recently in Australia that says there's an urgent need for reframing the idea of challenging behaviour so that people with disability are viewed, assessed and responded to in ways that are person-centred, evidence-based, with human rights and dignity at the core. And so that is really where we're coming from today, and what we hope to share with you a little bit in the presentation is an alternative perhaps that does try to embrace those concepts. So what is the CALMER approach? So as I said when we started, we utilize knowledge translation, and that is a specific way that you look at science and research to synthesize it down with what we've learnt about how humans interact with one another, to understand the relationship between emotional regulation and what we do or our behaviour. And we have a specific interest in the influences of parts of the brain that we break down and share with people. And that is the cortex or thinking brain, the amygdala that assesses danger, the limbic system, how our memory connects to those, and how we regulate. And what we found was, as we're working with people over the last 20 years, is that, like many things, that it was a bit like we want to assess only what's observable, measurable, only this kind of cortex thinking stuff. We don't, emotions are too subjective, so we won't include those. Or it's all about emotions. The people who have been talking only about cognitive stuff for years, they're all wrong. It's about emotions. And so what we want to try and do is say, we don't have to fight. Our emotions and our thinking don't have to be at war. The way we work with people doesn't have to be feeling versus thinking, but rather thinking and feeling. That's how we are as beings. We think and feel, and our brain has to work with both of those things. So for us to ignore one or the other, it just kind of ignores what neuroscience says about how our brain works. But we did find that there was this gap between, the new neuroscience that's telling us that our brain has to work with emotions, has to work with our cortex, our cognitive thinking. And then some of our models and approaches were saying, but that subjective stuff's too difficult. So we needed a new way of doing things. The other gap that we found was between, there's been a huge rise in understanding of trauma-informed practice. And a lot of people, and particularly here in Australia, trauma-informed practice training courses. But we observed that while people were starting to talk about it and trying to grapple with it, trying to implement it, having great intentions, a lot of the models that people were working within didn't really allow space for that trauma-informed work to actually seep through and really transform how we work. this is another reason for why, and that we really enjoy the work of Carl Rogers, who's been working in writing for a very long time. And there's a quote here that says, "The state of empathy, or being empathetic, is to perceive the frame of reference of another with accuracy, as if we were that person." And we find that kind of inspiring, and it does inspire not only how we approach our knowledge translation, looking at research, but also what we want to do in supporting people, and also in working with people so that they can support others. And how we are feeling, Borges says, determines our subsequent perceptions and behaviors. And that's just really reinforcing that idea that the thinking and feeling has to be incorporated together. So I talked a little bit about knowledge translation, and we're just going to show you this and not talk you through it. These are some of the areas of research that we looked at in looking at the CALMER approach. It's diverse, and what we did was try to take the best of those ideas to lay a foundation for our framework. And then from those core theories and approaches, we've got 4 key pillars, which are that we live in relationship with one another, and that relationships are key and important to understanding how we support each other. We very, very solidly have incorporated the concept of co-design within the framework, and that is that everybody participates. It's not about an expert coming in. It's about a facilitated process where everybody's encouraged and enabled to be part of the process. We want to have meaningful participation in life, and for that to be at a core, and for the person to be at the core of what's happening. And we really firmly believe in the building of capacity. So in systems, environments, in families, in individuals, all of those areas, we can make a difference. And so those are the 4 pillars. Some of the key philosophies that have come out of that are that everyone needs to feel safe, heard, and understood. And when we get stuck, we come back to that point, about safety and feeling heard and feeling understood. That CALMER, the regulation in our brain, is an ongoing process, and everybody shares that. So not just someone who has a disability, or not just a support worker, but everybody does, everybody in the system. And everybody's perspectives and their timelines and how they're thinking and feeling matter. And we fully believe in harnessing the powerful relationship between our emotions and our interactions, what happens in the world around us. And that there is a potential and possibility for everybody to have a practical understanding of how the brain works according, and how that changes depending on what emotional state we're in. So we talked about co-design, and we got here a picture of some cake ingredients, right? And you can have the best ingredients in the world, but if you throw them in a baking dish and put them in the oven, it comes out looking like this. However, apply a framework and you can create something amazing that looks like this picture on the right. And what we have, when you look at that knowledge translation, there are so many people doing amazing work, so much amazing research. And so our approach in the CALMER approach is to take all those ingredients and create the idea that we need of a recipe that can be applied. And the cool thing is about a cake, right? The cake on the right-hand side, it's a wedding cake. It's not really about the baker, it's about the couple. And the other thing with a cake is, once you've got baking skills, you can make a chocolate cake, you can make a birthday cake, you can make a wedding cake. It can be applied in different ways. And so the idea of co-design for us as well is about informing and empowering environments so that people can then take the ideas and learn and grow from them from within their own spaces and apply it. And there's not one thing that's far more important than others. It's about how they're incorporated together that embeds things in the natural environment. One of the biggest changes that we made almost straight away was reframing language, because we found the word behavior has such strong connotations. And if we look at the definition of behavior, it is about something that a person does, and it's observable and measurable, and it belongs to that person. Rather than talking about behavior, we talk about interactions, because as the little picture there says, we want to look both ways. We want to look at this reciprocal action, the effect that we have on our environments have on us, how we relate with others, how we regulate with others, and understand that it doesn't only, an unsafe interaction that's occurring doesn't only belong to the person. It's not only about the person's behavior. It's about interactions that are occurring. And when we look at it in that way, we're removing judgment. We're removing this kind of, it's a hopeless situation. And we create this sense of hope and possibility that we can actually change what is happening.
All right. So let's change the drivers now a little bit here. So for me, one thing that is become very fundamental is the notion of mind the mind, whose perspective and timeline matters. And as you can see here, the quick question for me here always comes down to who is saying that or who is thinking that. Is it me or is it the person? I may think that perhaps putting a child or an adult into a seclusion room, I think that may be the best thing for them. Yet, from whose perspective? From my perspective or from the person's perspective? And then if I was to ask for that particular person, I wonder what they would be saying. Naturally, what we're also saying here as well, physically, we can only be present at this time, whilst our mind, it could be floating across. And what we know as well is the impact of trauma, our memories. We could be so stressed, not because of what is happening, but perhaps because of what we have just remembered at this very moment. Or we could be so stressed because of concern about what's coming up. So nevertheless, the body will be expressing that in this very moment. But if I don't understand that concept, if I don't understand from that perspective, I might be making my own judgment, and even at the point where I might even start to project that my perspective is that person's perspective. And that's where there's a big mismatch of perspective. And that's where we really want to get the person's perspective. What does this mean to the person? And so for us, then we dive into this notion, traditionally, what's the function of the behavior? Then just a very simple, all of us here today could be crying. I guess crying would be the constant, perhaps, interaction of behavior if you wish. However, the contributing factors, the triggers, the reasons we could be crying could be quite different from person to person. And so therefore then, if I'm only looking from my perspective that the crying is for this particular function, that's my perspective, but I'm not taking into account the person's perspective. And so how do I then move on to the next stage in the co-design aspect to say, okay, what that might mean to this person? And as we know, there's so many factors that could contribute in us to be engaged in that particular interactions. In particularly, as we know, our stress response could be also another factor as well. So, yeah.
Can I share?
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, so just to give an example of that in practice, I worked in a group home a long time ago, and many years ago, and there's a lady crying at the meal table. And the assumption is that she's crying because the meal isn't what she wants, that she's looking to get attention or to get something else, and to get control over her environment, perhaps. But last year, I was crying at the dinner table, and nobody thought those things about me. And the reason that I was crying at the dinner table was because it was a couple of weeks after my father had passed away, and I had prepared a meal that was something that he would have really enjoyed. And you can see, in those two scenarios, one person gets a whole lot of assumptions made about them, and another person doesn't. And for us, that's not okay. we want to see every person as living in the context of their lives and in their reality, and for their environment to be accepting and embracing of them. So we kind of have moved away from classifying things as a function of behavior, but rather to look at what is meaningful to the person and to help the environment to see what's meaningful from the person's perspective.
Yeah.
So this is our process that we use, and it's a very similar therapeutic process, but it has different terminology, and there's a reason for that. So we don't start with an assessment phase if we're supporting an environment. We start with a phase we call shared meaning. And this is really the longest part of what we do, because during the shared meaning phase, we are helping everybody in the environment to understand what is happening from a person's perspective when there's an unsafe interaction happening. And we use collaborative problem solving, to establish with everyone in the environment what's happening, and to really, for everybody to understand on an in-depth level, and understanding the neuroscience behind why that might be happening. And what we find is that this is what creates that sense of empathy. It also creates a driver for a plan, because if I come to you and I say, I see what's going on here, this is the problem, when you're doing this, the person is responding like this. Immediately, if I'm receiving that, I may get defensive and I won't receive that. However, if we go on a journey together and we explore the ideas, and someone says, gosh, if they're feeling like this and I do this, that might not help the situation. And so they're already starting to plan, how can I change? And so then we have this environment that's ready to plan together to how to create these environments, how to create these spaces, how to support the person. And when that plan is in place, we don't implement a plan, because a plan becomes active, because people are enthusiastic, they're involved, they're understanding, and they're empathetic. We still want to look at outcomes or shared learning, but what we want to do is have an environment that's capable of reflection, of understanding, being mindful, of understanding what's happening, so that they can continue this process when new challenges arise.
So then we start to go, I think that's how much theory you're going to be getting. I think from now on, just going to be the hands-on making that cake, hopefully. And so for us, then what's CALMER? I think it's an understanding how the brain works from a common denominator. And I think for us that matters, because according to the neuroscience, as we were saying before, CALMER, I may need to do the stuff. Yeah. So we're thinking about the cortex. Every human being has a cortex and works in a very similar way. And that's what we're thinking about, and do this process with the families in trying to get them an understanding what that might mean. And if you think about our flexibility, our listening skills, problem-solving skills, are all sitting within that space of a cortex brain there. Then we also have our amygdala, that we see the way that I understand is about sensing danger, assessing, is it safe or not safe here? And then the way that we also understand that's a little bit like the smoke alarm that does not distinguish between a smoke from a burning toast and a smoke from a real fire. As far as it's concerned, a smoke is a smoke. What you're trying to portray here perhaps is that when you may remember happy moments, it doesn't mean that it's happening right now. We'll be all good. But also perhaps when we remember sad moments, the brain you may perceive if that was a bit unsafe as a danger. And even though it's not happening right now, but the brain still perceives a danger, and that will be perhaps sending some message to the limbic system or emotional brain that, we might be at the risk here, so you need to try to do something. And that's when, depending how impact that might be, that's when we start to see some of those stress response occurring out of that space. We then have our memories, and the way that I like to think it's all the positives is there, all the lived experiences there, all the negatives, and a lot of the unresolved emotions is still sitting and floating around. The thing here for us is all those lived experiences influences how we see what is happening around us here. And naturally, if we are a lot more anxious and stressed, that will have a much bigger impact. And for us, then we also have this notion of emotional regulation. And the way that we understand is the ability to cope with the stress in the moment. We also understand here perhaps then that perhaps the cortex, the memory, and the emotional regulation, they live in the same household. Therefore, then as the limbic system feels anxious, feels stressed, feels unsafe, naturally, as we know now, your ability to be creative, to be, reasonable, to be flexible, your ability to remember the right thing to do, your ability to deal with those stress is diminished. And so therefore then, and that seems to be a common denominator in all human being, regardless of where you are coming from, your age, your language you speak, that seems to be a common. And so therefore then, when I'm trying to understand a person, a situation, I'll be using the CALMER framework to try to understand where was that person at emotionally at the time. And this is a day-to-day example of the work where I'm really taking each step. By the way, this is an example of the work that I was doing, a training, and just getting people engaged and involved in the process, because this is about building capacity. So it's not me coming here, and because people, they could be well experts on the matter. So we come from the perspective. We also looked into this notion of a critical analysis process, and I like this quote of a colleague, Bradley, where she goes, "Best practice recommends evaluation of these behaviors by considering both the individual and the environment. However, comprehensive evaluation are unavailable. What evaluations are possible tends to take on the more limited perspective that typically focused on managing concerning behaviors with restrictive behavioral interventions and medication, rather than clearly identify underlying causes and contributing contributory circumstances." So we take this quite seriously, because we really wanted to dive it in. And then when you start to understand how that brain works, then you start to move away again from the person as being the source of the cause of all those issues, but look into the environment. So we change the lens a little bit here. So what has influenced CALMER? Critical process. You may believe, may not believe, but I think it was this notion of the critical analysis throughout the investigation from the air crash investigations. Naturally, here we could be looking at that airplane. You could just be looking at the fire underneath and be focused on that fire as the problem, as the issue altogether. On that moment, yes, definitely that fire was the issue. But the question for us then, that investigation doesn't stop there. That investigation goes to the heart or to the brain of that aircraft, and that will be your flight recorder, the black box, to get into details, all the chains of events that led to that point. And so with that in mind, it got me to be thinking a similar process of when there is a bit of unsafe interactions, I'll be curious now. Who is in charge? Is it my thinking brain or is it my limbic brain? In this scenario here, definitely that property damage was a bit of a concern. And so for us, then we're looking on that same concept, but the investigation questions for us, it turns into, is the unsafe interaction the problem, or is it the consequence of the problem? The other question as well becomes a fundamental for us as well, is what was the person thinking when this happened, or how was the person feeling when this happened? Just a little bit of a background on that picture there. What had happened there was someone's water jug got leaking. So whilst the person went to sleep, we replaced with the jug with a new jug. The person woke up, went there, it wasn't the same jug, and that was enough to unravel. So then once we've done the analysis, what we able to do then was to conclude, well, I think it's things were changing in my environment, I probably won't be feeling happy either. And so therefore, then we did not attribute that as the person being the problem. But I think the environment had a lot of a contribution to it. And one way that could perhaps been prevented was to have involved the person in the process. And so with that in mind, then when you're doing our critical analysis process, we really takes a very deep dive in to try to understand all those steps, but in particularly the chains of events and those contributing factors. What we are trying to say here then is our cultural background, our language, our ability or our disabilities, the way that our brain functions, all of that we see as a contributing factor, and perhaps not the reason, not the cause of it. So therefore then, from my perspective, someone with a disability, I don't say, oh, they're having this behavior because they have a disability. I think that's too narrow-minded because naturally what the neuroscience is saying, anyone here, perhaps 10 out of 10 or almost, the more anxious one feels, the more you're likely to be short, sharp with your communication, and so forth. So therefore then, and naturally, if we then think about how anxiety and how people with disability, plenty of research is suggesting that the levels of anxiety it's a lot higher. And so for me, it seems to make sense to pay attention to that. And naturally, what we really wanted to get down to was that unsafe interaction the problem, or was it the consequence of the problem? That's where we are wanting to be looking to it. So one example, what we've done with that process then, just to illustrate here, what it came down to then for this particular person was my mother does not listen to my emotions. That's what came down to it. And we had so many other ideas there and approaches and consequences and medication and calls to the police. But at the end of the day, that was what was happening for the child, that he was not feeling that his mother was listening to him. In turn, his mother then concluded that all he needed was to feel heard and feel understood emotionally. And that was the turning point for that family as a whole. So for us, we see the value in that process of going beyond my assumption or beyond my perspective.
So if I read this little quote here, it says, when we make space and time for authentic engagement, mutually sharing curiosity and creativity to find shared meaning and understanding in whatever ways our body are responding to each other. So it's just an acknowledgement about how we are connected and our emotions are connected to each other.
Right, need to speed up a little bit. Okay, so he eats perhaps the heart and the brain of CALMER approach, perhaps. This is nothing new here. I think what is new here perhaps is that we have this new word for you now called a phenogram, and that is the understanding the relationship between emotions and interactions. And so for us, what we're really trying to capture here then is bringing in again CALMER back into life here, where we're saying when we are emotionally regulated, we are feeling safe, we're feeling connected, everything is going well. I think, as we know, this is the time for learning. We all know those things. And so then we also have this notion of a window of tolerance. And that's where sometimes we can start to notice that something is not quite right. However, according to our wonderful Dr. Stephen Porges, he came up with this idea of neuroceptions, which is our brains already perceiving danger before we are conscious about it. And that might explain sometimes in the environment where one might be raising the voice, for instance. And if we say, no, you're raising your voice, the person sometimes, no, I'm not. That's a clear example, they're not even conscious about it. However, the people around, it's already mindful and aware of it. So that, again, highlights the importance of how am I hosting myself? How am I, as a practitioner, as a teacher, as a father, it doesn't matter. How am I feeling emotionally? Am I aware how am I feeling on that moment? Because that's going to have an impact on the people around them there. We also say here as well, then the last one you have then what we call when someone is emotionally dysregulated, that's the time to feel safe. And that's what we're saying here. because it is emotionally dysregulated, we feel like people are feeling unsafe, and then you become a lot more protective, a lot more defensive, and that's when those stress responses are more likely to occur there. And then again, and from Dr. Bruce Perry's perspective as well, he talks about being able to regulate, relate, and reason with the person. So therefore, then, where is this person at emotionally? I need to be able to connect and meet with that person at that point. And naturally, if someone is dysregulated, priority is to safe, regulate, and then you can move it from there. Co-regulation for us as well plays it's vital in the work that we do, because naturally, if you're talking about schools, students, or if you're talking about services, the people that we are supporting, they will be relying on us to be emotionally regulated so they can co-regulate with us. So therefore, then sometimes it doesn't seem to make sense to me to secluded people to calm down, because that is against our biology. It's against our natural instincts, where what the neuroscience is saying, we need connection. We need to be able to correlate with those that it's around us. Therefore, then naturally, when someone is already emotionally dysregulated, the more pressure, the more physical, perhaps is strain on the person. I think that there isn't a sense of safe. There isn't a sense of a co-regulation there. The person is not really learning how to deal with those stress in a way that's safe. And what we find with this process, it's that a lot of the times when we're going through this process, parents will say, yes, now as my child is going up, I'm going up too. And then they said, yeah, that's natural. We also have situations where we say, no, I don't have to go up. Well, that's your thinking brain, not your feeling brain, because naturally it's almost impossible just to stay cool and almost disconnected when someone is hurting themselves. It doesn't sit down well. Even the other day at the school, the teacher decided to put this student outside because the student wasn't listening. And the child starts to scream and cry, and I felt my heart like, man, this is not all right. And said, he's so distressed. Oh, but he needs to learn. No, please bring him back in. As soon as he came in, he now able to self-regulate with others in the room. Because again, from the teacher's perspective, that's what he needed. But from the child's perspective, that wasn't at all. And so if we are not quite getting those perspectives quite right, from the person's perspective, we could be doing quite a bit of harm there altogether. And naturally, what we're also saying here as well is triggers and stresses, they may be the same across a lifetime. However, depending on how we are feeling, those same stresses, those same triggers will have a very different impact on us. A simple example, it might be if you had your 8 hours of sleep, good meals, wonderful. If you had a 2-3 hours of sleep and been hungry for the last couple of days, you may not be on the same capacity to deal with the same stress that you were able to deal with when you were well fed and have a good night rest there. We also are mindful as well of the other chemicals in the brain that is also occurring simultaneously whilst we're dealing with this whole process as well. And this phenogram, we find it's a little different from other approaches or other explanation of what is happening, because we are truly integrating emotions and interactions. And therefore, then for us, a key question often is, how do I know that this person is emotionally regulated based on the interactions? How do I know that this person is at the window of tolerance based on how they are interacting? And naturally, the last one is, how do I know that the person is on that emotionally dysregulated, again, based on the interactions as well. And then that sort of sets the foundation for us as a principle, because if we don't understand that, if we miss those points, I think we'll be missing the whole person. And the number of times that I came across kids and even adults where they would say, this person is either emotionally regulated or this person is emotionally dysregulated. We don't seem to see the in-between. Then once we start to find the in-between, we make a huge gain there, because we kind of naturally we prevent from getting to that point of becoming emotionally dysregulated. Other scenarios at the times would be comes in and people go, oh no, he's never calm, he's never regulated. That's a alarm bell, because if he's never calm or if she's never calm, also the environment, the teachers or the family around, they may not be calm either, and that kind of goes hand in hand. So that's where then I think we pay very big emphasis on understanding that relationship between emotions and interactions, because that again is going to influence how we learn, how we understand, how we engage, how we interact, participate. It's just, our emotions, we have a bit of a take on that side over them. Next.
We have a little bit of information here about just, I guess this is about outcome measurement, because one of the questions we get is, if we're not looking at the function of behavior and if we're not always counting data, how do we know that what we're doing is working well? And one of the things that's really important to us is having a range of things in place that people are able to help them, to use them to reflect on whether we're heading in the right direction. Are we getting this right? Are we understanding the person? And so we just got some examples here of some of the tools and measures that we've used to understand whether working with people with the approach is working well. So here we have, this is a measure called the Sheffield Learning Disabilities Outcome Measure. And this is about really how a primary caregiver feels competent in supporting a child with a disability. And you can see that when we get an overall score of 25 or above, then that's generally a coping, a healthy system. And in this case here, you can see the blue line was before being involved, and because of the scale, it doesn't look like a huge change at the bottom, but that total score went from 18 to 33 for this particular family, and how well they felt they understood, which shows us that we have this capable environment. When people are feeling more able to cope, they often are more regulated, and then that again just keeps building that resilience in the system. And then this one is also, it's not just about that immediate circle, but the team around the family. How well are they able to function? So because we use co-design and we want to engage with everybody, it actually builds this overall resilience and capacity within a team. And so in this particular case, the score went from 20 to 39. This is obviously a very quick overview. Then we also use this idea of the carer burden. This is a really old test, and we don't particularly love that terminology from our perspective. But again, when people around the primary support people are feeling less stressed, when they feel safe, when they feel heard, then they're able to manage better, and they're able to cope with whatever comes, and they're able to use their thinking brains and to reflect and to be more resilient. So you can see the stress levels and the ability to cope really improving in this particular outcome here, where a low score is better than a high score.
So in this case, he then pretty much from about 2-3 months, the stress level went from 66 to 33, and that'll be a 50% reduction in the stress level. And that's for us, we then come up with this idea that reducing stress levels reduces stress response in the environment. Because again, we don't need to dwell into how much high stress levels are no good for everyone altogether.
So we sort of talked about this, but there's a lot of people reflecting, that people like us, the people with disability, need to have their whole emotional life and their self recognized so that they aren't marginalized. So what we're going to do now is Fran's going to take you through some of the examples of working with people in real scenarios using this approach.
I think one of the things on this slide, go back in please. I think is this notion that in general, there has been a lack of interest in the emotional lives of individuals with a disability. I think that's for us, it's another bigger emphasis that, if I feel this way, then there is nothing that just say that the person with a disability is not feeling the same. And again, if I go back to CALMER, the feelings, it's irrelevant. That doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. It's the feelings there. It's already built in. So therefore, then we wanted to bring again that at the forefront. And here's a summary example of the practical conversations with the phenogram, understanding what is happening there. And I think the picture he tells pretty much what's happening inside that brain. What I love here was the ability to have a simple conversation with this adult woman, where she was able to articulate using her artistic talents to express how she was feeling. As a result of that, then we're able to come up with a plan that even when she was on that emotionally dysregulated space, we still been able to meet the duty of care by allowing her to be by herself, but yet we would be checking in with her in compared to previously where staff would be trying to get her out of the room when, from her perspective, what she needed was just time by herself there. And so, and this, her statement, he then, I guess, blew me away at the time. I know the right thing to do when I'm calm. However, it gets out of control quickly when I'm not calm, and anything can happen. I think, again, we think about the work of Dan Siegel when he talks about flip the lid. Very quickly, anything can happen. And so we want to be very mindful of that, and it can happen on both ways as well. And he just to illustrate that, this particular scenario here, it's we are offering a lolly or even a chewing gum to support this adult man to regain emotional regulation. And the mother here, she could not believe when she offered him a lolly and he said no, and took him a couple of minutes or so to come back and to accept it. And that's what you're trying to get at. That in the heat of the moment, that thinking brain is just not there. It's just not quite listening. It's just not quite processing. And she knows quite well that if he sees a lolly, there is no way that if she offers him a lolly, he's going to say, it's not going to take him a 2 minutes to decide on it. It's like, yeah, I'm having it. But in this was just to demonstrate that process. And here's another sample of a phrenology, quite not as much information because I think a lot of the conversation was taking place in around. That conversation was taking place with a mother that English is a second language. My English is a second language, so I'm still making up for it. But by the end of the conversation, this mother, she keeps telling me, but I'm a human person too. I can feel angry. I can feel frustrated too. And then I said, yes, that's just a natural thing. And so therefore then that sense of empathy starts to kick it in. And I really love what this mother also mentioned. I've learned that my emotions can play an important role in the end period of emotional dysregulation. Memories of past events where I have been physically hurt can influence where I'm at emotionally, especially at the early stage of Dan's feeling emotionally dysregulated. This has particular relevance as to my ability to respond well to Dan. At times, he really needs support. The right support at the early stage can make a huge difference as to whether Dan's emotions escalate. The language I use and how it's used are also things I need to pay close attention to it. Again, that's about the person being able to self-reflect and to embrace that and think, I need to be mindful of my own perspective, of my own triggers, and how am I going to manage that. And here's another example with a little bit more of a details into the phrenology, explaining to a bit more of the details. And then this also is a part of a training provided for the families as well. Next one, yeah. But the good thing here perhaps about this was, as the mother said, 2 weeks after, the carers already could notice improvement in that relationship. And that same mother, the other day, she also shared with me that the carer commented to her that the carers are not only just using that support, the framework with the daughter, but they are also using with other people that are supporting as well. And that's for us and a testimony perhaps of building capacity and people being able to take the support further. We also, in a nutshell as well, we are trying to use the phrenology as well to gauge where the person may be at emotionally. So we're trying to see if we come in here today, now where you might be at emotionally. because the higher they are, the more we want to be focused in trying to what can you do to reduce those levels of stresses in, especially if the parents say, no, we are at number 10, that for us would be, they thinking brain is it's offline, therefore then, unless if we can support the parents, the teachers, or whoever may be to feel emotionally safe, connected, and have a different perspective, it will be hard to move forward. And here's an example of, sorry, the one that looks a bit blurry there, but here's an example again of a practical phenogram where I'm asking the family where they are at in that particular time. Now they were that very much on that between 9 and 10, like, you know, unless if I'm providing a support that's therapeutic for everyone to feel safe, to feel connected, it's not going to be shifting much at all. The other one, again, was a child expressing how they might feel at different stage of the phenogram. In a nutshell, then, what we're really trying to support with the families is to have this sense of, how do I know where this person is at emotionally based on how they are interacting at that particular time? And then what support do they need at that moment? And what do I need to do? And what I should be avoiding. And sometimes what I think someone needs may be quite different from what they need in their own words. And so that is an example of this phenogram where I was asking the question to this 11 years old. Now, when you are here, what does it feel like? Then that was his pictures, his drawing. I prompted him a couple of questions. What support do you need in this space? And he was able to tell me, again, how do you interact when you are feeling this way? As you can see, his word being, yeah, I'm polite, I'm nice. As he moves up, I'm a bit more stubborn, not polite to people. And when he's emotionally regulated, his word, he flip out, he scream, he breaks things, etc. But the thing that it's interesting here is he also talks about what's to avoid. In this case, he's talking about teachers escalating or raising their voices and putting pressure on me. Those are the things that it doesn't seem to help him out. In the process, all he's talking about is him needing a friend in the classroom that can be there with him. And then, as he's saying, even though when he's at window of tolerance, the friend can be there, he's probably can cope with that. But when he's emotionally dysregulated, he needs an adult to take him out for a walk. So at no point he then, this child is talking about, I want to be put in a secluded room where the people come and tackle me down. At no point this child is saying that. And so therefore then it's important then for us to work from the child's perspective to make sure that's on the same page. And then he's writing at the bottom says that this page is where you can soak up most of the knowledge about me. I was like, that came from him. I didn't even prompt him to say that. And so that's for me is the power of facilitating that co-design, facilitating space for people to feel safe, for people to participate, and for people to contribute. It's about 8:30, so we need to. Okay, I'm just aware of the time here, so I think I'll need to speed up a little bit here. Now I think we are just going to move up to the, let's get to the end a little bit there for me. Oh, this one. Yeah. So I just want to share this last one here before we open for question here a little bit. And here's an example that I felt challenged in that moment, because I came in here with my little tools and with my little sort of how are you feeling today? And this 8 years old child looked at this thing. He said, oh, they tried this thing before, it didn't work. Interesting. I explained again. He said, nah, there's nothing here that can relate to it. I said, how come? He said, because I feel sad at the school. There is nothing here on my little table that says sad. Then I said, right, okay. It was a bit of a learning curve there for me. So I wonder what sad looks like. He did a drawing of the sad picture. Okay, nice. And then I said, I wonder what happy looks like. And then he went on this mind map situation where he goes, here's the thing, and then he have a little line across there where he goes, sometimes I can just get a little bit sad but be able to come back, and sometimes I get a bit more sad and come back again. But if he goes, but if I take the down line, it gets to a point where I can't come back on my own. And then he goes, behind those black dots are question marks. It extremely blew me away, because even when I said to him, all right, so it's just like you go from one and then you choose, no, it doesn't work like that. It could go anywhere at any time. And that's where, again, if we think about that co-regulation, if we think about being able to be attuned to each other's emotions, being able to understand what might be happening to someone emotionally based on how they are interacting, and how am I going to be adjusting that support, I think has become fundamental. This child as well, the same child then gave a new flavor to the phrenologram, where did the phrenologram, and then he kind of drew this volcano, and he said, for me, it feels like this volcano. And the lava, as it starts to come out, and everything's on the way, is going to get hurt. But it's not the lava's intention to hurt anyone. And so when I start to behave this way, it's not my intention to hurt anyone, but anyone in the way can get hurt. That's like an 8-year-old child saying those things. It's very different from me perhaps making an assumption, doing this for this particular reason. Clearly, this is not what this child really wants to do. Let's just bring up to, and I think also this quote here as well from the psychiatrist. The child continues to present with the behaviors of concern, aggression, making threats of harm to others, and overeating. However, his mother reports some early signs of benefits from the behavior support myself there, who has also liaised with the school with the benefit. His behavior as described as becoming more manageable. He has not dysregulated to the point of repeatedly smashing property in the family home. His mother has not needed to call the police or hospital, not needed to administer PRN medication. I just would like to acknowledge here that when I first started working with this family, I was on the 4th of April. 8th of April to be precise, 2022. So we're talking about 6 weeks in, and being able to get this sort of outcome. I think it sounds quite promising out there. And so for us, then in conclusion, everyone needs the right level of therapeutic support at the right time to succeed. Everyone, regardless of gender, age, race, ability, needs to feel safe, heard, and understood, and connected. CALMER facilitates the process to enhance safety, empathy, and connection when we feel we have lost our grounds. CALMER is a win-win approach and provides win-win outcome. CALMER's knowledge and understanding belongs with everyone and in all settings. That should be...
Yeah, so that's just a little reminder of what underpins it.
All right, that's us.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you there, guy.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I really appreciate, in fact, I love the last slide, and I actually took a screenshot of it. I loved it so much. I did that with a couple of slides as you went. This has been a tremendous presentation, and I think what really makes it is just this, is your journey, is the journey that you've been on since you started in this work, and hearing kind of all of the influences that have led to the approach that you now are taking and using to help and support individuals is really amazing. So thank you for sharing your work and your experience with us today. I want to invite people that are watching live in the chat. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, feel free to now put those in the chat. And of course, as you were presenting, we had a couple more people that jumped on board, and we seem to be doing really well in the Southern Hemisphere today. A number of folks from Australia and New Zealand, but also folks from here in the United States. So it was great to see people jumping on and joining us. So, and in fact, just got a comment here from Pam. This is brilliant, love it. And Pam is someone who I happen to know that also does a lot of amazing work. And it's interesting because I think many of us have had this ability to take in this work from so many people that are doing things that are meaningful and important. And I love the way that you've taken that and synthesized it into the work that you're doing. So, thank you so much for that. I did have somebody ask here. One of the questions was, these slides are great. Can I get a copy? Beautiful presentation. So let me know if you're willing to share your slides. And of course, we can make those available if folks, if you are, let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions,
Yes.
and we'll give folks in the chat a chance to put in questions that they might have as well. But again, I'm really just kind of, I'm in a way just I'm inspired, and the journey that you have been on throughout your careers, and the way you've taken this work and built it into the CALMER approach is really inspiring. And I just want to kind of get back to the roots here. How did you both end up kind of in this doing this work, and what was your inspiration, and what has inspired you to take the journey that you've taken to not only just learn something and do something, but to continue growing and learning the way that you very apparently have, and shaping your own approach? So what's been your inspiration kind of from the start, and what keeps you going doing this work? And I want to hear from both of you on that. So, Fran, we'll let Amy get us started here. And then I'll jump over to you.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story from 2001 when I was a new grad OT, and I was really inspired by the work of an OT called Karen Stagniti, and I did a postgrad course, very short course with her, which was around really play therapy. And I was working with a young child who was autistic, and I couldn't provide the kind of therapy that I knew the child needed, because they needed to have meaningful play. They needed to have, I was trying to understand what their sensory preferences were, and to understand what helped them to regulate as a child. And I was young and keen and enthusiastic, and the child was actually in a really strict behavior program. And what was going to help the child to learn and grow, from my perspective as a therapist, the parents were saying, yeah, we can't do any of that stuff, because the child has to learn to sit at a table. And I was like, what do they like to do? It's like, no, they have to sit at the table when you're here. You have to sit at the table. Like, I can't, the sitting at the table was aversive for the child. So it became, in effect, it was restraining the child at a table. I actually had, it was this massive tension, I guess, between what I knew was going to help learn and grow, and perhaps what the behavioral approach at the time was. And that's kind of right at the start of my journey. And then
and unfortunately, not to interrupt you, but unfortunately, a lot of that behavioral approach is still alive and well, and there's a lot of premium put on compliance, when in fact it really is detrimental to so much that we're trying to do.
And I guess at that point, I was a new grad. I wasn't coming in to kind of critique somebody else's therapeutic approach. I was really just trying to apply what I knew was going to work for the child, and getting to know the child and the family. And it was a really kind of an eye-opening thing for me, and sort of set me on this best practice journey in a sense. And then I've worked in a lot of different sectors, and one of them worked with people who have been through catastrophic injuries, brain injury and spinal injury, and looking at how just that kind of natural understanding of the trauma that occurs through that process, and including all of that in how I worked as an OT, and a lot of the time with kids that have been through particularly traumatic spinal injuries. And then kind of, as Francisco and I have been married now for 15 years. So as he was going on his journey, and I had kind of my own separate clinical journey, and then it reached a point where it was sort of like the things that Fran was looking at got closer to, I guess, some of those learnings and work that I had done, particularly around co-design. So we ended up in this journey together. But I didn't start out in working specifically as a behaviour practitioner in any way. Yeah,
I appreciate that. So, Fran, I'm going to give you the opportunity to share your experience and And kind of same question, what was your inspiration initially, and what's kind of kept you inspired, other than Amy? Because I can see that Amy is probably.
Yeah. You kind of a frozen there, guy, but I'll take that from here then if you guys can hear me. The way that I got into the disability sector was by mistake. I just came from Brazil, December 1999, and so early 2000 I went to looking for a course, 2001, and then they were talking about wanting to do a courses in. My thing was to become a teacher or a psychologist or a social worker. That was my headspace. And then I said, "Oh, you have this course called a community service here that you can do and be okay with it." But that was disability focused, and that's how I got into it. And I don't look back. And I just don't look back. And as soon as I started working there, I could see the days of being a teacher, the days of being a social worker, the days of needing to be, a psychologist, and that space really grew for me. One of the biggest influencer in my journey was Dr. Gary Lavina from the Institute of Applied Behavior Analysis. He was one of the pioneers in promoting positive behavior support, and he has a couple of books on non-aversive practice. And when I did a training with them in 2006 or so, it really opened up my mind to what is possible just by trying to understand people. Then 2011, when I became a behavior support practitioner, was doing courses with Dr. Bruce Perry on the NMT. And then again, the insight of the neuroscience is really kind of like, whoa, where do we go from here? And then think, and now we are locking people into those 4 boxes? What are we doing?
Right.
And so very clearly that it starts to ask questions, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And so therefore then 2018 on my organization I was working at the time, I had a 2-minute talk on rethinking the function of the behavior. That's where kind of a thing starts to started from there. And then since then, now we look back, perhaps the first go, if I'm honest, I really haven't tried to have a crack at ABA on the function of the behavior. So that was my initial take on rethinking the function of the behavior. But definitely we went beyond that. I think now we come up with this beautiful, inclusive, affirming, evidence-informed practice that everyone is contributing to that support. And so for me, and now I don't look back, and the results from the families, to hear some of those comments and to see lives being transformed and to see people not needing to go back to the hospital and no need to have a medication. I think that it's on the right direction. And also being able to build that sense of capacity in the environment where everyone is taking ownership of the process. I think that's, for me, that's part of the journey.
Yeah, no, I love that. And 2 things stick out in my mind listening to both of you. And the one is something that I have a tendency to say quite often, which is, kind of based on the quote from Maya Angelou, which is, kind of like, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. This journey is all about continuing to be curious. And that was the second part. It's about curiosity, and curiosity takes us into places where we begin to understand things from different vantage points and different perspectives in a way that we can do better. And your entire story and the evolution of the work that you've done really seem to underscore that idea of like curiosity driving this desire to continually learn and do better. And certainly you've had the opportunity to work with and learn from, you mentioned Bruce Perry, you mentioned collaborative problem solving, you mentioned,
yes.
A lot of the work that has influenced what you've been doing. And it seems very much in line with your careers of, continuing to be curious and learn and do better. And I love it. Love the work you're doing, and appreciate you coming here to share with us today from across the world, from where I am. And I feel very fortunate, not only that we were able to connect in the first place, but that we're able to connect in this way and share things with people across the world of things that we can do to improve outcomes for a lot of human beings that, we can do better for. So, as we're wrapping up here, I just want to thank you both for one, the dedication you've had through your careers and the work that you've been doing. It really is an honor to be able to connect with you and have this opportunity to share the space with you. I want to give you both an opportunity for any final thoughts that you might have as we wrap up here. This time, not to put anybody on the spot, but this time, Fran, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave us with as we end our live event here today?
I think one thought that would be coming here for me would be perhaps a couple. One is that the CALM approach is not just a change in the frame of the lens of your glasses. The CALM approach is changing the lens altogether. And therefore then we're seeing things quite differently. The other beautiful quote I didn't put it in is a quote that the mother said, as I was sharing the session with them, they said it felt like them looking into a mirror, that they could see exactly what to do. So I think what the CALM approach is trying to do here is try to be able, now we're just human. We can see each other in the mirror. Mm-hmm. Compared to some of those other approaches where I can see Guy in the mirror, but I cannot see myself next to Guy in the mirror because that is just for Guy. And so I think there is this sense of real empathy, real inclusiveness in this space here. And I think for me, CALMER is still very early days. So I think I'm looking forward to see what's up ahead. Mm-hmm. So thanks, Guy.
Yeah, and let me ask you a question in that vein before we get to Amy. Is CALMER an approach? So do you offer training or certification, or can people come to you and go through a process by which they can then be in some way trained or certified to use the CALMER approach in their settings?
Yes, we are in the process of doing that, where we are currently offering a allied health training for practitioners, also families as well. So we are trying to provide training for families, maybe around that 2 hours for the foundation knowledge, how the brain understand the relationship between emotions and interactions. And then for practitioners, then we are taking them on a journey about the 12 hours or so to apply that skills, because it's not just about here's a new form, this is what you do. There's a lot more into it there, unless if we started to see things really from the person's perspective and change some of those tools. So yeah, that's what we are trying to.
Excellent. Good. Yeah, I mean, definitely, work worth sharing, and
yes.
The more we can do to kind of get that out. And of course, I have to say I love the Franogram. I'm just wondering where that got its amazing name from. All right. So, Amy, let me shift over to you. Any final words, final thoughts that you want to share with us as we wrap up today?
No, I've been so honored in my 23 years of working alongside of people and families and people who have worked in this sector for a long time, and just learning from everybody. And I want to particularly shout out to Robin Ryan and Wendy Harris, who I worked with for a number of years on a number of co-design projects. They have working as peer support with lived experience. And we sat one day looking at a resource we'd co-designed, and the social worker said, look, everyday people, they don't want this, they don't want so much evidence, they don't want the science and stuff. And Robin and Wendy said, actually, the way it's presented, I actually do want to know. I want to understand why this works. I don't just want to know what to do. I want to understand why things work so that I can make that empowered decision for myself about how I'm going to apply that. And I think that with the CALMER approach, we are trying to do that, is to take, maybe, what's very academic, but turn it into something that everybody can understand and make those kind of lived choices with that information behind it. So I just really appreciate what I've had the opportunity to learn from others around me, and that they've been patient with me on my journey as well. And yeah, it's just awesome to be able to connect with yourself, Guy, and with your alliance. And thanks for the opportunity to share today. That's I guess we really hope to make a difference for the way that people can relate together, because ultimately that's what we all want to do as humans, right?
Yep, absolutely. And you know, I'm hoping that one day I can make it out there to Australia and visit you in person, because that would be really nice. But until then, it's great that we can jump on here and do this. I do want to share a couple of comments just before we say goodbye to our audience here. A number of people have jumped on to say, you know, thank you. This has been awesome. Excellent. Thank you. So good. I have another one here. Love that. Understanding how behavior is reaching so many. It's so encouraging. Thank you so much. The world needs calm. So anyway, with all of that, I want to thank you both again. I want to thank our audience, as always, for coming here and joining us for the last hour and 20 minutes or so. I do want to encourage you, if you watch this and you find value in it, you know, one of the things we want you to do is share these things with others. The way that we influence change is by getting this information to more people in more places. So if you're a parent and you know you found this useful, share it. Share it with other parents. Share it with your school team, whoever you might. If you're an educator, share it with your administrator. You know, we need to get this kind of information out to more people in more places. So thank you all very much for being here today. We will go ahead and say goodbye, and we will be back here again, I think, in 2 weeks with another presentation. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks again.
Thanks,
you.
Scott.